The air in the back room of the Redemption Saloon was a toxic brew of stale whiskey, sweat, and desperation. It was a suffocating space where hope came to die, and Cole Morgan felt its weight pressing down on him like a tombstone. Across the scarred table, Silas Blackwood smiled, the expression a bloodless slash in his manicured face. The banker's eyes, pale and cold as a winter sky, held the predatory calm of a wolf that knew the trap was already sprung. In the center of the table lay the sum of Cole's world, the deed to his 1,000-acre ranch, the last tangible piece of his wife, Sarah. He could almost feel the brittle paper beneath his calloused fingers, could smell the parched dust of the land it represented. A land that was dying, just as she had. For 2 years, the drought had bled it dry, turning fertile pasture into cracked earth and the winding creek into a scar of sun-baked mud. Blackwood's loans had been the only thing keeping him afloat, each one a link in a chain that was now pulling him under. "The pot's to you, Morgan," Blackwood said, his voice a low purr of satisfaction. He gestured with a clean, unblemished hand at the pile of cash and gold coins that stood against the deed. It was enough to pay off the loans, buy seed, and maybe even drill a new well. Enough to save Sarah's dream. Cole glanced at the 3 queens and 2 jacks held tight in his hand. A full house, the strongest hand he'd seen in a night of losing battles. His heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage of bone. This was it, the final stand. He met the banker's gaze. "I'm all in." The words felt like swallowing dust. Blackwood's smile widened. He didn't reach for his stack of coins. Instead, he slid a folded set of legal papers from his coat pocket and pushed them deliberately into the center of the table. "I'll see your ranch," he said, "and I'll raise you." A heavy silence descended on the room. The other players, shadows nursing their losses, leaned forward. This was something new, something ugly. Cole stared at the papers. They were thick, official, bound by a red ribbon. "What is that?" Cole's voice was a low growl. "An asset," Blackwood replied smoothly. "The indenture contract for one Anna Jensen. Her husband's homestead, as you know, fell into my possession last month after his unfortunate accident. The widow's labor is contracted to the owner of that land for another 2 years. As I now own the land, I own the contract." The room felt suddenly colder. Owning another person, it was a line Cole had never imagined approaching, let alone crossing. It was the kind of thing men like Blackwood did, reducing people to entries in a ledger. He looked at the faces of the other men, seeing a mixture of shock and morbid fascination. No one spoke. The image of Sarah's grave flashed in his mind, a simple wooden cross on a hill overlooking the dying land. He remembered her hands, always working, turning that stubborn soil, her face lit with the belief that they could build a paradise here. To lose it now, the law's the law, Morgan, Blackwood taunted, sensing his hesitation. "Or is the price too steep for a man of your principles?" Cole's hand trembled as he pushed the deed forward until it touched the indenture contract. His principles were a luxury he could no longer afford. Sarah's memory was all he had left to protect. "Call," he said, the word tasting like ash in his mouth. Blackwood laid his cards down with a flourish. 3 kings, a fine hand, a winning hand, against almost any other. With a resolve born of pure despair, Cole revealed his 3 queens and 2 jacks. An audible gasp went through the room. Blackwood's smile vanished, replaced by a flicker of disbelief, then cold fury. He had been so certain. For a moment, he simply stared at the cards, as if willing them to change. Then, with a quiet scrape of his chair, he stood, smoothed his waistcoat, and walked out of the room without a word. Cole didn't move. He stared at the pot, at the coins and the deed and the cursed contract that now belonged to him. The relief was a hollow, sickening thing. He had saved his wife's ranch by sacrificing a piece of his own soul. A few minutes later, the saloon's proprietor nudged the door open. "She's here, Mr. Morgan." The widow, Anna Jensen, was brought into the room. She was slighter than he'd imagined, dressed in a plain, dark dress that had been mended more than once. Her hands were clasped before her, and her face was a study in stillness, betraying nothing of what she felt. But as her gaze swept past the men and landed on the empty chair where Blackwood had sat, Cole saw it, a brief, almost imperceptible flicker of ice-cold hatred in her eyes. Then it was gone, replaced by the same unnerving calm. Cole couldn't bring himself to meet her gaze. He pushed his chair back, the sound unnaturally loud in the silent room, and scooped his winnings into a leather pouch. All except the contract. He left it lying on the table, a stain on his victory. "Wait outside," he told her, his voice rough. "I'll be out directly." She gave a small, almost imperceptible nod and left as silently as she had entered. Cole walked out into the cold night air, the weight of his winnings heavy in one hand, the weight of his shame heavier in his heart. He found her standing by the saloon's horse trough, a single, battered carpetbag at her feet. The moonlight silvered the stray strands of hair that had escaped her severe bun, and for the first time, Cole saw the exhaustion etched around her eyes. He stopped a few feet from her, the legal papers clutched in his hand. "Mrs. Jensen," he began, the words feeling clumsy and inadequate. He held out the contract. "I want nothing to do with this. You're free. Take this and tear it up. Go wherever you wish." He expected relief, gratitude, perhaps even tears. He was offering her life back, an escape from the man who had taken everything from her. She looked from the papers to his face, and her expression didn't change. There was no flicker of joy, no softening of her features. Her eyes, dark and unreadable in the moonlight, held his with a startling intensity. "No," she said. The word was quiet, but it landed with the force of a physical blow. Cole stared at her, certain he had misheard. "What?" "The contract is legal," she stated, her voice flat and devoid of emotion. "I signed it. I will work it off, as agreed. I am bound to that land." Her refusal was absolute, inexplicable. She wasn't just accepting her fate, she was insisting upon it. A chill that had nothing to do with the night air crept down Cole's spine. He had won a widow's indenture in a poker game, and she was refusing her freedom. As she stood there, a silent sentinel under the vast, uncaring sky, Cole realized the poker game wasn't over. He had just played a hand against a ghost, and he had no idea what the stakes truly were. The journey to the ranch was a silent pilgrimage through a dead land. The wagon wheels cut through inches of fine, pale dust that rose in ghostly plumes, coating everything in a film of gray. The sun, a merciless white eye in a bleached-out sky, beat down on a landscape of skeletal trees and cracked, thirsty earth. The land was a perfect mirror of Cole's soul, a place where hope had withered and died on the vine. He kept his eyes on the trail, the reins loose in his hands, acutely aware of the woman sitting beside him. Anna said nothing, her posture ramrod straight, her gaze fixed on the horizon as if she could see something beyond the desolation that Cole could not. When they finally crested the last rise, the homestead came into view, and Cole felt a familiar pang of shame. The house, built with his and Sarah's own hands, looked tired, its porch sagging slightly. The fields, once green with promise, were a patchwork of brown and ochre. The great oak on the hill, where he had asked Sarah to be his wife, looked brittle, its leaves rust-colored and curled. "This is it," he said, the words tasting like failure. Anna's only response was a slow, deliberate survey of the property. Her eyes weren't those of a housekeeper assessing a new post, but something else entirely. She seemed to be reading the land itself, noting the direction of the wind as it stirred the dust, the way the shadows fell across the parched canyons, the stubborn patches of thistle that clung to life where everything else had surrendered. He showed her to a small, stark room off the main living area. "This will be yours," he said, setting her single bag on the floor. "The well is out back. It's low, but still drawing." He wanted to keep his distance, to treat this as a simple, if distasteful, business arrangement. He was the rancher, she was the indentured help, but Anna refused to fit into the role he'd assigned her. She worked with a silent, unnerving efficiency that both impressed and unsettled him. She didn't just clean the dust-choked cabin, she seemed to be reawakening it. She moved through the house with a quiet purpose, her hands always busy, her presence a steady, almost challenging, counterpoint to his own stagnant grief. He watched her from the porch on the third day as she stood by the well. Instead of simply drawing water, she was examining the stone lining, running her hand over the dry packed earth surrounding it. Later, she approached him, her hands dusty. "The stonework is loose on the north side," she said, her tone matter-of-fact. "You're losing water to evaporation before it ever reaches the bucket. If we reinforce it with clay from the creek bed, we can slow the loss." Cole stared at her. He'd built the well himself, and he hadn't noticed. He spent the afternoon with her, digging up the cool, damp clay from the dry creek's underbelly and packing it into the well's foundation. They worked without speaking, the rhythmic slap of clay on stone the only sound between them. A quiet, grudging respect began to form in the space that her silence carved out. The following week, a rider appeared on the horizon. Cole recognized the horse before the man. It was Jed, one of Blackwood's hired men, a rough character with a sneer permanently etched onto his face. Cole took up his rifle, not aiming it, but holding it in a way that made its presence known as Jed rode into the yard. "Morgan," Jed called, his eyes flicking from Cole to Anna, who had emerged from the cabin to stand silently on the porch. "Mr. Blackwood sent me. Just wanted to check on the widow's welfare. Make sure she's settling in." The insinuation was as thick and foul as saloon sludge. "She's fine," Cole said, his voice flat and hard. "State your business or ride out." Jed's gaze swept over the property, lingering on the well and the distant, rocky canyons. "Just being a good neighbor," he said, his smile all teeth. Mr. Blackwood always protects his investments. All of them. He tipped his hat to Anna, a gesture of mock courtesy that was more insulting than an open curse, and rode away. Cole watched him go, the rifle suddenly feeling heavier. The threat was clear. Blackwood's interest in this ranch, in Anna, went deeper than a lost poker hand. He turned to find Anna's composure finally broken. A tremor ran through her, and her hand went to her throat as if to suppress a cry. The flicker of fear in her eyes was more alarming to Cole than Jed's open hostility. He'd seen her face down Blackwood with icy calm. What about this place made her afraid? He took a step toward her. "Anna?" She seemed to steady herself with a deep breath, the mask of neutrality slipping back into place. "It's nothing," she said, turning to go back inside. But Cole had seen it. That night, after a silent supper, he found her staring out the window toward the dark maw of the canyon at the western edge of his property. It was a place he'd long written off as useless, a jagged scar of rock and shadow where nothing grew, not even weeds. He came to stand beside her. "What is it about this place?" he asked quietly. What was Jed looking for? Anna was silent for a long moment, her reflection a pale ghost in the glass. Then she turned to him, a decision made. "Come with me," she said. He followed her out into the cold, moonlit night. She led him not to the well, but toward that same dead canyon. Her steps sure-footed and certain. The air was still, the only sound the crunch of their boots on the gravelly soil. She stopped at a peculiar cluster of gray, flat-topped rocks that looked no different from any other in the canyon. The moonlight cast everything in stark relief, a world of black and silver. "This land isn't dead, Mr. Morgan," she said, her voice filled with a strange, resonant certainty that made the hairs on Cole's arms stand up. She knelt and pressed her palm flat against the cold, dry ground. "The water is just hiding. My husband taught me how to look." Cole stared at the spot where Anna's hand rested on the ground, then back at her face, illuminated in the stark moonlight. Her certainty was a palpable force, an anchor in the desolate silence of the canyon. A rational man would have dismissed her words as the ramblings of grief, a desperate fantasy born from loss. Cole was a rational man. He knew this land. He had walked every inch of it, felt its heat, breathed its dust, and watched it die. But he had also seen the cold hatred in her eyes for Blackwood and the quiet strength that had allowed her to survive the man's cruelty. This was not a woman given to fantasy. "All right," he said, the word of surrender to the mystery she presented. "Show me." He retrieved 2 shovels from the barn, their steel scraping against the stone floor. Back in the canyon, under her direction, he began to dig. The ground was like iron, a stubborn crust of baked clay and gravel that fought every thrust of the shovel. For over an hour they worked, the rhythmic chunk and scrape of their tools the only sound under a sky littered with cold, distant stars. Sweat soaked the back of Cole's shirt, and his muscles burned with the effort. They had dug a shallow pit that yielded nothing but more dust, more rock. "Anna," he said finally, leaning on his shovel to catch his breath. "There's nothing here, it's just rock." She didn't answer, her own breathing ragged from the effort. He saw the flicker of doubt in her eyes and felt a pang of something akin to pity. He'd been a fool to indulge this. "Let's go back," he said gently. "It's late." "No, wait." She dropped to her knees, running her hands over the surface of one of the large, flat rocks they had partially uncovered. Her fingers traced its contours. Searching. He marked it. Thomas always marked his finds. Her voice was a desperate whisper. She pulled a handkerchief from her sleeve and began wiping away layers of dust from the rock's surface. Cole crouched beside her, his skepticism warring with a reluctant curiosity. He watched as her frantic movements slowed, then stopped. She pointed with a trembling finger. At first, he saw nothing. Then, as his eyes adjusted, he made it out. A tiny, almost invisible etching in the stone, no bigger than his thumbnail. It was a simple triangle with a single, wavy line cut through its center. A surveyor's mark. He said this was the sign for a protected source. Anna whispered, her voice thick with unshed tears. A source that runs deep. A current of adrenaline shot through Cole, chasing away his fatigue. This wasn't a guess. It was a map. Following the direction the triangle pointed, they moved 5 paces north and began to dig again. The ground felt different here, still hard on the surface, but with a subtle give beneath. 10 minutes into their renewed effort, Cole's shovel broke through the crust with a soft, sucking sound. He stopped, his heart hammering. The air that rose from the hole was cool and damp, carrying the rich, loamy scent of life. He dropped to his knees, plunging his hand into the opening. The soil was cool, then wet. He pulled his hand back and stared at his muddy fingers in the moonlight. Then he dug with his bare hands, clawing at the earth like a desperate animal, until his fingers broke through into a small cavity filled with thick, life-giving mud. And from that mud, a tiny, steady trickle of clear, cold water began to seep, catching the moonlight like a vein of liquid silver. It was a miracle, a quiet, impossible miracle in the heart of a dead canyon. Cole simply stared, the reality of it slow to penetrate the walls of his despair. He looked at Anna, seeing tears finally tracking clean paths through the dust on her cheeks. This wasn't just water. It was salvation. It was hope. The moment of shared triumph was fleeting, eclipsed by the shadow of the truth that followed. As they sat on the edge of the newly discovered spring, Anna finally told him everything. "My husband's name was Thomas Jensen," she began, her voice low and steady. "He was a surveyor for the railroad. He found this spring almost a year ago. He knew what it was, knew it was fed by an aquifer deep in the mountains. He knew it was valuable enough to change this whole valley." She paused, gathering her strength. He also knew Silas Blackwood wanted it. Thomas had a meeting with him, tried to file a legal claim to the water rights. Blackwood offered to buy the findings, but Thomas refused. He believed the water should belong to the land, not to one man. Cole listened, a cold dread settling in his gut as he began to understand. A week later, Anna continued, her voice breaking for the first time. "He came out here to take more readings. He was found at the bottom of this canyon. They called it an accidental rock slide. But I knew Blackwood had killed him." She reached into her carpet bag, which she had brought with her from the cabin, and withdrew a small, leather-bound journal. This was his log. It's filled with his notes, his drawings. Everything is in here, the location of the spring, the geological data. But it's in a code he developed. I haven't been able to decipher it all. He knew Blackwood would come for it. Cole took the journal, the worn leather cool against his skin. He was no longer a rancher trying to save his property. He was a partner in a dangerous fight for justice. Anna wasn't just an indentured widow. She was the keeper of a secret that could get them both killed. His apathy, the suffocating blanket of grief he had lived under for 2 years, burned away, replaced by a cold, protective rage. "We need tools," he said, his voice hard. "Picks, timber for shoring. We have to unearth this spring properly before Blackwood realizes what we're doing." The next day, they rode to Redemption. The journey felt different. They were no longer a reluctant master and a silent servant, but allies united by a shared purpose. Their arrival in town was met with a chilling silence. As they walked toward the general store, conversation stopped. Doors seemed to close. The few people on the street averted their gazes, their faces a mixture of suspicion and fear. Cole felt their judgment like a physical force. The town belonged to Blackwood, and they had just declared themselves his enemies. They bought what they needed: pickaxes, shovels, heavy rope. The storekeeper's movements curt. His words clipped. They left as quickly as they could, the weight of the town's silent condemnation following them down the dusty main street. They rode back to the ranch with a newfound sense of urgency, the tools rattling in the back of the wagon. There was a sense of hope between them, a feeling that with the spring and the journal, they finally had a fighting chance. But as they crested the final hill, the feeling vanished, replaced by a cold, sickening dread. Cole pulled the wagon to a halt, his hands tightening on the reins. Anna followed his gaze to the small, lonely hill where Sarah was buried. Something was wrong. The simple wooden cross that had marked her grave for 2 years was gone. Not just fallen, but broken. Its pieces scattered on the disturbed earth. It was a violation, a desecration. A clear, brutal message from Silas Blackwood. Nothing is sacred. I can touch you anywhere. I can destroy everything you love. Cole jumped down from the wagon, his body rigid with a fury so profound it left no room for words. He walked to the grave, his boots leaving deep prints in the dust, and knelt, picking up the splintered pieces of the cross. The fight was no longer about land or water. It was about memory, about honor, about the soul of a man who had just been reminded that he still had something left to lose. The desecration of Sarah's grave plunged Cole back into a darkness he thought he had left behind. It was a calculated act of cruelty, a violation that twisted the knife of his grief. He spent the rest of the day in a state of simmering, silent rage, painstakingly repairing the cross, his hammer blows echoing the fury in his heart. Anna worked beside him, her presence a quiet anchor. She didn't offer empty words of comfort. She handed him nails, held the timbers steady, and shared his vigil, understanding that some wounds were too deep for words. The act of rebuilding, of restoring this small piece of honor, forged a new, unspoken layer to their bond. That night, the cabin felt less like a sanctuary and more like a besieged fortress. With the doors barred, they sat at the table, the flickering lamplight casting long, dancing shadows on the walls. Thomas Jensen's journal lay between them, its worn leather cover a silent testament to the man who had died for the secret it held. He knew Blackwood was dangerous, Anna said, her finger tracing the faded gold lettering on the spine. He called him the Dragon in his notes. Cole opened the journal, his hands, though clean, feeling stained by the day's grim work. The pages were filled with a precise, angular script, interspersed with detailed geological drawings, survey charts, and strings of numbers that meant nothing to him. "What is all this?" he asked, pointing to a series of coded notations. "It's his personal shorthand," Anna explained, "a mix of surveyor's symbols and phrases from books we both love. He used it to protect his findings. For hours, they bent over the journal, a strange and intimate collaboration. Anna provided the key, the memories of shared stories and inside jokes that unlocked the code, while Cole's practical knowledge of the land gave context to the technical data. A drawing of a hawk was a reference to Hawk's Peak. A notation about the serpent's spine referred to a winding ridge of rock. Slowly, painstakingly, the secrets of the valley began to emerge. They discovered that the spring was only the beginning. Thomas's surveys indicated the presence of a vast underground aquifer, a subterranean river that fed the spring and held enough water to irrigate the entire region. To control the spring was to control the lifeblood of the valley. Blackwood wasn't just a greedy banker. He was a would-be king, and their ranch was his kingdom's source. "This is why he drove the other ranchers out," Cole murmured, the pieces falling into place. "The foreclosures, the accidents. He's been consolidating his hold on all the land that touches this aquifer. He needs your section most," Anna added, pointing to a complex diagram in the journal. Thomas believed the main access point, the place where the water is closest to the surface, is right here. In our canyon. The gravity of their discovery settled over them. This was no longer a personal feud. It was a war for the future of the entire valley. The next day brought the enemy to their doorstep. 2 wagons rattled into the yard just after dawn, carrying Jed and 4 other hard-faced men. Blackwood was not with them, a clear sign that this was not a social call. Cole met them on the porch, his rifle held loosely but ready. "Morning, Morgan," Jed said, his tone dripping with false cordiality. "We're here on official business. Got an order from the land office to survey the boundary line between your property and Mr. Blackwood's." He held up a piece of paper, the official-looking seal a clear fabrication to anyone who knew Blackwood's methods. "My boundary line is marked by the cottonwoods a mile east," Cole stated, his voice as hard and unyielding as the parched earth beneath his feet. "You're trespassing. That's where you're mistaken," Jed sneered. "The original survey was inaccurate. The line is the canyon ridge. We're just here to correct the error. It was a transparent lie, a legal pretext to get onto the land and locate the spring." The men began to fan out, unhitching their horses, their intentions clear. Cole cocked his rifle, the sound sharp and final in the morning stillness. I said, "You're trespassing. The next man who takes a step further will be carried out." Jed's hand moved toward the pistol at his hip. "There are 5 of us, Morgan. You do the math." Just as the tension reached its breaking point, the cabin door opened. Anna stepped out, her expression calm and resolute. She held Thomas's journal in her hands, holding it up not as a weapon, but as a symbol of the truth they possessed. She didn't say a word, but her steady, accusing gaze swept over the men, one by one. It was a small act of defiance, but it shifted the balance. Jed and his men were bullies and thugs, not killers, at least not in broad daylight with a witness. They exchanged uncertain glances, their bravado faltering under the weight of her silent condemnation. Cole, bolstered by her courage, stood his ground, the rifle unwavering. "Get off my land," he repeated, his voice low and dangerous. Jed hesitated, then spat on the ground. "This ain't over," he growled. He barked an order to his men, and within minutes, they were gone, leaving behind only dust and the lingering threat of their return. The confrontation left them both shaken, the adrenaline fading into a weary apprehension. That evening, as they sat on the porch, watching the sun bleed across the horizon, the carefully constructed walls between them finally crumbled. "He almost killed you today," Anna said, her voice barely a whisper. "They wouldn't have shot first," Cole replied, though he wasn't entirely sure. He looked at her, at the strength that seemed to radiate from her slight frame. "You saved my life, coming out like that." "We saved each other," she corrected gently. A long silence fell. Then, Cole found himself speaking of Sarah, the words flowing from a place he had kept locked away for 2 years. He told Anna about their dreams for the ranch, about her laugh, about the crushing guilt he felt for failing to protect her dream from the drought, from Blackwood, from his own despair. "I let it all die with her," he confessed, his voice rough with emotion. In return, Anna spoke of Thomas, not of his death, but of his life, his passion for the land, his unwavering integrity, the way his eyes would light up when he made a new discovery. She told Cole how Thomas had believed this spring could be a new beginning for the whole valley, a place where families could thrive. In the shared space of their grief, they found not just solace, but connection. 2 lonely souls, marooned by loss, discovering a shared shoreline. As if summoned by the emotional turmoil, the sky began to change. Dark, bruised-looking clouds rolled in from the west, swallowing the last of the light. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of rain, a scent so long absent it felt like a memory from another life. "A storm's coming," Anna said, her voice hushed with a kind of reverence. It broke upon them with a fury that seemed to shake the very foundations of the cabin. Thunder cracked and rolled, and rain fell in blinding, violent sheets. It was a false promise, a deluge that the parched land could not absorb. Instead of soaking in, the water carved new gullies in the dusty fields, carrying away precious topsoil in flash floods. It was a powerful, heartbreaking symbol. Only the steady, life-giving flow from the hidden spring could bring true and lasting renewal. Inside, huddled by the fire, they made their most critical discovery yet. Anna, remembering a story Thomas had often read to her, found a reference in the journal that finally unlocked the last piece of the code. "Proof against dragons," she read, her finger tracing the cryptic entry. "Hidden, where the shadow of the Hawk's Peak touches the river at noon on the solstice." Cole's head snapped up. Hawk's Peak was a distinctive rock formation 10 miles to the north. "The winter solstice," he said, his mind racing. "That's 2 days from now." They looked at each other, the same thought dawning in their eyes. The journal wasn't the only proof. Thomas had hidden something else, something more powerful, something he believed could slay the dragon. And now they had a map and a deadline. The storm outside raged on, but inside the cabin, a new kind of storm was gathering, a storm of hope, of purpose, and of a final, desperate race against time. The world was remade in silence and cold. 2 days after the storm, a fragile peace had settled over the land, the sky a brilliant, aching blue above a landscape blanketed in pristine white. They rode out before dawn, the crunch of the horses' hooves on the crusted snow the only sound in the vast stillness. This was not a journey. It was a pilgrimage to a place marked on a dead man's map. The air was charged with a tension so thick Cole could taste it, a metallic tang of fear and hope. Anna rode behind him, her arms wrapped around his waist for stability, a practical necessity that had become a silent source of comfort. He could feel the warmth of her body against his back, a steady, living presence in the intimidating emptiness of the landscape. They spoke little, their words clipped and practical, reserved for navigating the treacherous trail. Their real conversation was in the shared glance that lingered a moment too long, in the steadying pressure of her hand on his arm when the horse stumbled, in the grim set of his jaw as his eyes scanned the ridges for any sign of movement. They were a team now, moving with a singular purpose, two small figures against a backdrop of unforgiving beauty. Hawk's Peak rose from the plains like a stone sentinel, its jagged silhouette sharp against the morning sky. They reached the river at its base as the sun began its slow climb, and the waiting began. It was the most unnerving part of their journey. In action, there was focus. In stillness, there was only the cold grip of apprehension. Cole felt exposed, a target in the open. He scanned the surrounding trees, the rocky outcrops, every shadow that could conceal a threat. "He's watching," Anna said, her voice a soft murmur against his back. "It wasn't a question." "I know," Cole replied. They watched as the shadow of the peak, a long, dark finger, began its slow journey across the snow-covered valley floor. It was a natural clock, counting down the minutes to a moment that would either save them or destroy them. The tension stretched thin, vibrating between them like a wire pulled taut. Finally, just before noon, the tip of the shadow touched a gnarled, ancient cottonwood that stood alone by the frozen riverbank. Its branches, heavy with snow, reached like skeletal arms toward the sky. "This is it," Cole said, swinging down from the horse. He helped Anna dismount, her movements stiff from the long, cold ride. Together, they approached the tree, their breath pluming in the frigid air. A hollow, dark and deep, was carved into its trunk, almost completely obscured by a drift of snow. Cole cleared it away with his hands, his heart pounding a heavy rhythm against his ribs. Reaching inside, his fingers brushed against the rough, oily texture of a waterproof pouch. He pulled it out. It was heavy, solid. With trembling fingers, he untied the leather thong and tipped the contents into his hand. 2 documents, rolled and sealed with wax. The first, he unrolled carefully. It was an official survey map, its lines drawn with the beautiful precision of a master cartographer. A bold red line clearly marked the boundary of his property, and within that line, Thomas Jensen's elegant script detailed the location and depth of the aquifer. It was signed, dated, and stamped with the seal of the Territorial Land Office. It was legal, irrefutable proof. The second document was an affidavit. As Cole read the words, a cold, hard fury solidified in his gut. It was a sworn statement from another surveyor, a man named Elias Vance, a friend of Thomas's. It detailed, in stark, damning language, how Silas Blackwood had summoned him to a meeting and offered him a staggering sum of money to create a forged map, to declare Thomas's findings invalid, and to testify, if needed, that the aquifer was a fiction. Vance had refused. "Proof against dragons," Anna whispered, her voice filled with a mixture of grief and triumph. Thomas knew. He was building a case. This was it, the smoking gun. The truth, witnessed and notarized. The snap of a twig behind them was their only warning. "I'll take those." Silas Blackwood stepped out from behind a thicket of aspens, a pistol held steady in his hand. Jed was with him, a rifle cradled in his arms, his sneer a familiar brand of casual menace. They hadn't been watching from a distance. They had been here all along, waiting. "You've saved me a great deal of trouble, Morgan," Blackwood said, his voice a low, satisfied drawl. "I suspected Thomas left something behind, but I never imagined he had an accomplice as resourceful as your widow." Cole instinctively moved to place himself between Blackwood and Anna. "It's over, Blackwood. The truth is out." Blackwood laughed, a dry, humorless sound. "The truth is whatever the man holding the gun says it is. Now, hand me the papers." He gestured with his pistol. "And the journal. Let's have the whole collection." Cole's mind raced. They were outgunned, outmaneuvered. But as he looked at Anna's face, he saw not fear, but a white-hot, blazing anger. She had been a victim for too long. "I'll offer you a deal," Blackwood continued, savoring his moment of triumph. A generous one. I'll buy your ranch, Morgan. Pay you enough to start fresh somewhere else. California, perhaps. You can take the woman with you. All I want are those papers and your silence. It was the final test. The offer of an easy escape, a return to the apathy that had defined him. Cole looked from Blackwood's smug face to Anna's, and the choice was not a choice at all. The land is not for sale, Cole said, his voice ringing with a clarity and strength he hadn't known he possessed. And neither is justice. The words seemed to break a spell on Anna. The quiet, resilient widow vanished, replaced by a vessel of pure, righteous fury. She stepped out from behind Cole, her small frame seeming to grow in stature, her eyes burning with the fire of a soul pushed too far. You murdered my husband, she said, her voice not loud, but carrying the terrible weight of truth. It was not an accusation. It was a verdict. You met him in that canyon. You argued, and when he refused to sell you his findings, you pushed him from the ledge. You left him to die at the bottom of the rocks and called it an accident. Jed flinched, a flicker of panic in his eyes. Blackwood's smile finally faltered. I was there, Anna lied, her voice gaining power with every word. I followed him that day. I saw it all from the ridge. I saw him, enraged and exposed. Blackwood lost the last of his carefully constructed composure. His face twisted into a mask of raw hatred. He abandoned all pretense of negotiation. You should have stayed a quiet widow, he snarled, raising his pistol, the dark eye of the barrel fixing on Anna. Cole lunged, a desperate, primal roar tearing from his throat, his body moving to shield hers. A single, sharp crack echoed through the canyon. The sound was deafening. Final? The shot had been fired. The world held its breath in the aftermath of the shot. Cole, mid-lunge, saw Blackwood flinch. But it was Jed who cried out, dropping his rifle as he staggered back, clutching a suddenly blossoming red stain on his shoulder. Drop it, Blackwood. It's over. The voice was low and steady, carrying the unmistakable weight of the law. Sheriff Miller stepped out from the shelter of the cottonwoods, a smoking rifle held at the ready. He wasn't alone. A grim-faced deputy emerged beside him, shotgun leveled. Miller's gaze was fixed on the banker, his expression not of triumph, but of weary duty finally performed. Blackwood stood frozen, his face a canvas of shock and fury. The hunter had become the prey. For a moment, his eyes darted around, calculating, searching for an escape that didn't exist. Then, with a snarl of pure animal desperation, he lunged not at Cole, but at Anna, grabbing for the precious documents in her hand. Cole met him halfway. There was no finesse in it, just the raw, kinetic force of a man with everything to protect. His shoulder drove hard into Blackwood's chest, sending the banker stumbling backward into the snow. The pistol flew from his grasp as Cole brought him down, the fight ending not with a gunshot, but with the grim, satisfying thud of long overdue justice being served on the cold ground. Jed, moaning and clutching his shoulder, offered no resistance as the deputy disarmed him. Sheriff Miller walked over to where Cole held the sputtering, defeated banker. He looked down, his gaze settling on the affidavit that had fallen in the snow. I got your message, Morgan, the sheriff said, his voice flat. Figured a man doesn't ask the law to meet him at a place like Hawks Peak unless he's got something to show. He nudged the affidavit with the toe of his boot. Looks like you did. The journey back to the ranch was a study in quiet exhaustion. Blackwood and Jed, bound and sullen, were loaded into the back of the deputy's wagon. The sheriff took the journal and the affidavit as evidence, his face grim as he read them. Cole and Anna followed in their own wagon, the silence between them no longer tense, but filled with a profound, shared weariness. The adrenaline had faded, leaving behind the bone-deep ache of a battle won. The landscape, which had seemed so menacing on their ride out, now looked peaceful, its blanket of snow a promise of the life-giving water that lay dormant beneath. They reached the homestead as twilight was settling, turning the snow a soft shade of lavender. The repaired cross on Sarah's grave stood straight and true on the hill, a small, defiant silhouette against the fading light. Inside the cabin, the fire was banked low, the air still and cold. They moved with the slow, deliberate motions of people who had been pushed to their limit and survived. Cole added logs to the fire while Anna lit a lamp, its golden glow pushing back the shadows. The quiet domesticity of the moment felt surreal after the violence at Hawks Peak. When the fire was crackling, casting warmth back into the room. Cole turned to her. He held the indenture contract in his hand, the paper that had been the catalyst for everything. He didn't tear it up. He walked over to her and held it out. Anna looked at the document, then at him, her expression unreadable. "This was never about ownership," he said, his voice low and rough with emotion. "It was about desperation. Mine and his." He let the contract fall from his fingers onto the table. Then, from his coat pocket, he pulled out another folded paper, a new one, drawn up by the notary in Redemption Creek the day he'd sent the message to the sheriff. He unfolded it and laid it on the table beside the indenture contract. "It was a deed. The spring saved this ranch," he said. "Thomas's knowledge, your courage, that's what brought this land back to life. It's as much yours as it is mine." He pushed the new deed toward her. "We're partners, Anna. In the land, in the water, in all of it, if you'll have it." Tears welled in Anna's eyes, silver in the lamplight. She looked at the deed, which named her as joint owner of the Morgan Ranch, then back at the man who had faced down her dragons with her. She didn't speak. She simply reached out and placed her hand over his on the table. It was answer enough. Spring arrived not as a gentle guest, but as a vibrant, unstoppable force. The hidden spring, now fully unearthed and channeled, became the heart of the ranch. A network of irrigation ditches, dug with the help of neighbors who now saw Cole and Anna as saviors rather than outcasts, carried life-giving water to the dormant fields. The land drank, and it was transformed. What had been a landscape of brown and gray erupted into a riot of green. The fields flourished, the great oak on the hill put forth a crown of new leaves, and wildflowers bloomed in the canyon where a good man had died. The ranch became an oasis, a vibrant testament to the water that had been hiding all along. Cole and Anna worked side by side, their partnership deepening with the turning of the soil. The quiet respect born of shared crisis blossomed into a steady, unspoken affection. They rebuilt the broken cross together, and on the 1-year anniversary of Thomas's death, they planted a sapling beside it. They were healing the land, and in doing so, they were healing themselves. One evening, as the setting sun bathed the valley in a golden glow, they stood on the porch, a comfortable silence between them. The air was filled with the scent of damp earth and the sound of water trickling through the ditches. "We'll need a bigger barn by next year," Cole said, his gaze on the small, thriving herd of cattle in the newly green pasture. "And I was thinking, the children in this valley have no school. We have the water, the land. We could build one, right here by the creek." He was talking about the future. Not a future of just surviving, but of building, of creating a community. Anna leaned against the porch railing, a soft smile on her face. She looked at the fields, at the water that shimmered in the last light, at the man standing beside her. The quiet, stoic rancher had been reborn, his grief giving way to a new sense of purpose. "Thomas wanted this land to give life," she said, her voice soft. "And it has." She turned to look at him, her eyes clear and full of a love that needed no grand declaration. "To the fields, and to us." Cole looked at their joined hands, resting on the railing. He thought of the desperate man in the saloon, the broken man at his wife's grave. It felt like another lifetime. He looked into Anna's eyes and saw not the ghost of his past, but the promise of his future. He didn't kiss her. He didn't need to. He simply smiled, a real, unguarded smile of profound peace and gratitude. The spring had brought more than water. It had brought them both back to life.